And I'm going to bring Dr. Jeff up. Dr. Jeff Myers, I told him today I've been a big fan of his ministry. I actually heard about it about 3 years ago, just the time I had a 16-year-old. And I was really trying to encourage her to go, and it didn't work out at that time, but I'm hoping we still have the future and she still hasn't outgrown it. But it's just something I know many of you will relate to this. How do you talk to your children about a worldview? If they don't have a Christian worldview, what questions do you ask? How do you get engaged in a conversation? What can you do? And then, of course, Dr. Jeff will share about the Summit, and that's available where you can send your grandchildren and have them really have their life changed, right? Their life can be changed forever. So, Dr. Jeff, welcome. So happy to have you here tonight. I'm just going to let you jump right on and get us started.
Thank you, Barb. I loved the videos that you played ahead of time in those songs. Really moved my heart. I'm not a grandfather yet. I'll just go ahead and say that right up front. But I'm a father. I have 4 children. They're 25, 23, 21, and 18. And they are in boy, girl, girl, boy. And they are, my oldest is a drug addiction counselor. My first daughter manages a therapeutic horse operation. My second daughter is a helicopter pilot. And my youngest son is graduating from high school this year and also going into aviation. And since I am a dad, I figure a dad joke would be appropriate. I only have one, and that's about my daughter being a helicopter pilot. So the joke is this: I can't wait for my daughter to have children so that she can be a helicopter mom. So there you go. That's my one dad joke. But I'm really glad to be here tonight to talk about how to help our grandchildren talk about God, talk about Jesus, learn about a biblical worldview. And I'll start off by telling a story of an experience I had a number of years ago. I was traveling to another country, and I got there a little bit early, the evening before my event. And so I decided to walk through the city, very large city, just to see what the vibe was. And as I walked down the sidewalk in the shopping district, a man walked up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to buy a real fake Rolex?" And I thought, what do I say? How am I to respond to that? Are you sure it's a real fake? I didn't know exactly what to say, but I knew what he was asking. I knew what he was telling me. He was telling me that he had counterfeits of watches that were very expensive if you bought the original, but his were less expensive, but they were better counterfeits than the other people selling counterfeits on the street because his looked more real. And I've often thought about the battle of worldviews in that way. I define a worldview as a pattern of ideas, of beliefs, of convictions, and of habits that help us make sense of the world, of God, and our relationship to God and to the world. A Christian worldview says that God created everything, that he made us to be in his image, but that as humans, we have fallen into sin and we need redemption. Jesus Christ came to secure that redemption on the cross. And the important thing to understand about one of the important things to understand about a biblical worldview, it's not just a commitment that we make in our hearts so that God will take us to heaven when we die. It is also something that is about his kingdom being realized on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, everything has to do with a biblical worldview. But there are counterfeit worldviews. And this is core to the way we help students at Summit Ministries who come to our 2-week programs and learn from top Christian thought leaders, people, some of whom have been on your program, like John Stonestreet from the Colson Center, and learn from these top Christian thought leaders how to get answers to their difficult questions how to understand a biblical worldview, and then how to apply it to every area of life, including their studies when they go off to the university. But the core to our approach is helping students understand that there are counterfeit worldviews out there that offer a counterfeit explanation of how we came to be here, a counterfeit explanation of what is wrong with us as human beings, and a counterfeit form of salvation. These counterfeit worldviews have been so persuasive that in today's culture, among young people who self-identify as Christians and regularly attend church, only 4% have a biblical worldview. What worldview do they have? Well, some of them have a Marxist worldview that says that we ought to have a government that's run by socialism, and that would be preferable because then everybody will pay their fair share. Well, what's the counterfeit about a Marxist worldview? It says that only the material world exists, that there's no God, no Jesus, no Holy Spirit, no heaven, no hell, nothing, no good, really no such thing as an idea. There's no such thing as inspiration. All we have is the physical world. And if it's not evenly divided, that means that somebody stole from somebody else. A lot of people believe that. In fact, 83% of young adults, church attending Christian young adults, say that they believe that the root of society's problem is that the owners of companies have taken more than their fair share by exploiting the working class. 83% of church attending Christian young people believe that. Other worldviews young adults are believing these days are a new spiritualist worldview that says that everything that exists is one. Everything is one. The oneness of all things is what we should be focused on. It's kind of like Star Wars. There's a light side to the Force and a dark side to the Force, but only one thing exists. So the Marxist worldview says only the material world exists. The new spiritualist worldview says only the spiritual world exists. There's no such that physical reality is an illusion. And there are other worldviews. A prominent worldview today is postmodernism, that's skeptical of all truth claims. It says bad things happen in the world when people claim to know the truth. And so if we all just admit that nobody really knows the truth, then we'll all be better off. When I survey students at Summit Ministries about the worldview influences in their own lives, they tell me that postmodernism is the dominant worldview of our time. In fact, we're now to a place where the vast majority of Americans believe that truth doesn't actually exist in reality. They believe that truth is up to the individual. We don't go out to try to educate ourselves so that we can find truth and understand it. We turn inside of ourselves. That's why people say things like, my focus is on speaking my truth rather than seeking the truth. Well, our grandchildren are caught up in a culture like this. It happens in their education system. It happens in the culture around them. Even if you send your children to a Christian school or you homeschool them, they still are influenced by this culture through the internet, through music, through movies, even through walking through the checkout counter at the grocery store. They see these headlines. They pick up aspects of these counterfeit worldviews. So the question is, as grandparents, what can you do to help your grandchildren? I'd like to share some of the things that we have found to be helpful at Summit Ministries. And I hope that you take some notes on this. I'll share practical strategies from this point until the end of my time. Then we'll have some time for question and answer. But Gary also, I think he'll put in the chat box there, a way for you to get a copy of the notes, so that if you're in a place where you're not able to write things down, or you really don't care to, knowing that somebody will send you a printout, good news, there will be a printout for you with the things that we talked about, plus some other things. And I'll share a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But core to understanding how to talk to our grandchildren about God, about Jesus, about a biblical worldview is a word picture that I want you to have in your mind. Imagine a DNA double helix. Remember seeing those pictures in science class? Two strands intersecting with one another, connected by nucleotides. There are two strands to the DNA of influence: truth and relationship. Truth and relationship. Truth without relationship makes people arrogant. Relationship without truth makes people apathetic because they say things like, well, can't we just agree to disagree? And you have your truth, I have my truth, and so forth. But when truth and relationship are intertwined together, it creates a powerful influence in the lives of young adults and even children. So here's a good goal as a grandparent. Make it your goal to put rungs in the ladder between truth and relationship for somebody every day. Now, how do you actually do that? At Summit, we focus on helping students understand a biblical worldview, answering the difficult questions that they have faced about their worldview. And then we spend a lot of time talking about the counterfeit worldviews, because we want them to be aware when they go to a college class that an atheist professor is religious. That person has a religious worldview. If you think about it, a religion means any set of beliefs about the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. Atheists have a religion. It is a counterfeit religion, but it is a religion. So once students understand that, they're able to identify the counterfeits more easily and know how to respond to them. But then they begin asking the question, what do we do? How do we talk to other people about this? And we teach skills of conversation. So here are a couple of key rules for conversation. And then I'd like to share 3 things that you can ask about when you're with your grandchildren, 3 things that you can talk about with your grandchildren. And then we'll, with as much time as I have, I'll share more specific strategies. And then, of course, we'll have a question and answer time. Okay, so where are we in our culture today? We're in a place where young adults feel isolated and alone. They feel that they lack purpose and meaning. George Barna, in his research done just this last December, found that 75% of young adults today say they have no sense of purpose that gives them meaning in their lives. 50% say they regularly struggle with anxiety and depression. Well, without being professional counselors, how do we enter into a world like that? Because we're seeing the impact of these counterfeit worldviews. People have tried to turn to them to find meaning, and they can't find meaning. A couple of strategies we use, and this is the first one. I just call these are the 5 conversation altering words. Tell me more about that. Whenever your children or your grandchildren or anybody else that you're talking to says something, instead of immediately replying, make it your first impulse to ask for more information. Those are the 5 conversation altering words. Tell me more about that. I learned these words a few years ago. I was teaching a Sunday school class. I had a guy in my class named Doc. He wasn't a doctor, but his parents named him Doc, so he got to be a doc his whole life. And he didn't like being in my class. I think he might have been there because his wife insisted that he go. He always sat in the very back row. He crossed his arms, he leaned back, he crossed his legs, and had a stern expression on his face the whole time. It's pretty intimidating. I didn't really want to talk to Doc, but one day I had to because I came into the class getting ready to teach, and the only person in the room at that moment was Doc. So I asked him, Doc, what do you like to do with your free time? What really returns energy to you and makes you feel more alive? Without changing his posture, he said, I'm building an airplane. And I thought, he revealed some information. Well, I could say, oh, yeah, that's cool. I like airplanes. You know, I go on airplanes a lot. But instead, I just asked, tell me more about that. Well, Doc talked about his airplane. He got so excited that he said to me before class started, you want to see it? Of course I want to see it. So Doc invited me over to his house where he had built this extra, probably a 3-car garage. And inside this garage, he had bins labeled with all of the different parts. And he was literally building an airplane in the middle of his garage. We looked at it for an hour. We talked all about it. Toward the end of our conversation, Doc said, when I finish it, you want to fly with me? No, sir. No, that's okay. That's fine. But from that moment forward, Doc and I had a connection, and it started with 5 conversation altering words. Tell me more about that. A second strategy that sounds counterintuitive, but it works. It's worked for me as a parent, and I work for a lot of the grandparents I know, is to play dumb. Now, playing dumb, I feel like when it comes to the culture we're in, it's easy for me to play dumb because I don't know a lot. I'm actually, for somebody who works so intensively with young adults, I really don't know that much about what songs are popular right now, what movies are popular right now, what video games are popular, what the slang terms are, all of those kinds of things. Well, when you're with your grandkids, and little children have a culture too that they're aware of and a part of, you can always say things like, can you help me understand? Somebody told me about this video game called Minecraft, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Can you help me understand? And let the children teach you a little of what's going on in their culture. Another thing you can do is ask, can you show me? Now, we all know this strategy because we've had to ask our grandchildren to help program our devices, but it works in other areas too. For instance, I was wanting to know with my own children what kind of music they're listening to and what songs on the radio they find compelling, what they have on their playlist, and so forth. So I said to them, hey guys, I need some new, fresh songs on my running playlist. I like to run. I call it running. It's not really all that fast. But I said, I'd like to have some new songs on my playlist. And are there some songs that you're listening to that you think have a fast enough beat for me to run with? And of course, one of them said, oh, you mean all the slow songs that we're listening to? Yeah, sure, whatever it is. Just give me some names of songs. So they gave me a bunch. It was 25 songs that they gave me. So I downloaded all of those songs, put them on my running playlist. And as I ran along, I could listen to those songs. Well, when one of them came on, if we were riding in the car, listening to the radio, I could say, hey, that's one of the songs that you gave me. I said, what does the artist mean when she says this? Or what is that slang? I don't understand that. Can you help me understand? You see, and it opens up the opportunity for us to talk about the culture because they are tutoring me and I'm playing dumb. Now, like I said, in my case, it's easy to play dumb. But if you don't think it's easy, just try it. Just say, hey, I saw a poster for something or other, or there was a concert in town by some group I've never heard of before. And do you know about that group? And what are they like? What do they sing about? Why do people like them? Those kinds of questions can open up conversation. I'd like to share with you. So you've got 5 conversation altering words. You've got the strategy of playing dumb. So what do we actually do in conversations that lead toward discussions of faith? And I'd like to share with you, first of all, 3 things to ask about. 3 things to ask about. Each one of these starts with the word F. And the first one is friends. The second one is feelings. And the third one is future. If you are taking notes, leave a little bit of space in between each one of those, because I'll give you a couple of questions that you can use to fill in there. The first one is friends. I have found that with students I work with, especially if they feel a little uncomfortable, they're not sure they want to trust me, or they're not sure I will understand something. If I ask them a very direct question, they might be hesitant to answer. But I have found kind of a parenting hack is this: ask them what their friends say. Ask them what their friends think about. So, for example, hey, I know we have this war going on and Russia has invaded Ukraine. Do any of your teachers talk about this? Have your friends talked about it at all? Is it something that people are concerned with? Does that scary to people? How do your friends see it? Another question you can ask is, what kinds of music or what kinds of movies or what kinds of video games are your friends interested in these days? Because I'd like to know a little bit more about the world that you're a part of. It's easier for a child in some cases to talk about what their friends are interested in, but then in the process, you get an understanding of what culture they're a part of. So friends is the first one. The second thing you can ask about is feelings. Questions like, how are you feeling about how things are going? During COVID, you might have had these conversations with your grandchildren. What is school like when everybody's wearing a mask and people are afraid they might get sick? Is that frustrating to you? How are you feeling about it? How are you feeling about not being able to get together with your friends when you want to? Well, what do your teachers say? Kind of get down to the heart of their feelings a little bit. You can even be more specific. You can say a lot of people that I'm talking to these days say they're feeling anxious. Are these kinds of things affecting you? Does it make you feel anxious? And what's that like? And what are the things that make you feel anxious? Another question you can ask. Sometimes kids will answer this, and my own children would be very honest with me about this, and I hope that they would in other situations. I would ask a question like, have you ever had the feeling that you're sad for no reason? Because I sometimes have that feeling. Sadness will wash over me, a sense that, boy, what is this? What is everything all about? Why is everything seeming to be spinning out of control? Why am I not able to get the energy I need to pursue my goals? And if you can get to that level of talking about that, then sometimes if a child is going through an actual clinical depression, then connecting with them with a counselor is really important. I am a fan of that. I have seen the power of godly counselors to help children really regain their footing and develop resilience. But sometimes they just need somebody to talk to. And sometimes they can't really talk to their parents. That's hard because parents are busy, the household is crazy, there's a lot of stuff going on, there's homework to be done and all of those kinds of things. Sometimes a grandparent is the one they can talk to. All right, so 3 things to ask about. And then here are 3 things to talk about. The 3 things to ask about all started with F. The 3 things to talk about all start with V. The first one is vulnerability. The number one thing I found with my own children and with students I work with at Summit Ministries, because in any given year, last year we had 66,000 students that we worked with. And I get to talk to a lot of them, not all of them, but easily 1,000 of them I get to talk to. And in talking with them, I've learned that when I'm vulnerable about my own feelings, it creates a place that is safe for them to talk about their feelings and their thoughts. So being vulnerable, I might even tell a story about when I was young, where I felt insecure, or where I wondered whether I would fit in, or maybe I felt scared. And depending on the age of your grandchildren, you know how to make these things age appropriate, but that can be helpful. I've also been vulnerable with my own children and in an appropriate situation with students at Summit Ministries about my own failings, things that happened when I was a young man where I didn't rise to what I expected of myself. And I failed, and I felt that I really step up and become a man in certain situations where I should have had courage or where I should have done the right thing and I didn't. Being vulnerable. And again, vulnerability always takes a lot of discernment. You have to be appropriate, obviously, and you have to be careful how you do that. But I think it's really important. And, I was thinking as I prepared for this of a conversation I had with my own grandmother when she was talking about her childhood. And she experienced when she was a child, and I did not know this until she was probably almost 90. She shared it with me about how she had been, if not sexually assaulted, at least put down sexually and taken advantage of. Even if it wasn't physical, it was a situation where emotionally it was abusive, and that she shared with me what happened in that situation. And I thought it was so, because I never knew that. It never occurred to me that my grandmother had the same kinds of problems growing up that I faced. I only wish we could have had that conversation much earlier. And I'm glad that we were able to do it, but that took a lot of vulnerability on her part. And of course, she waited to share a lot of those things with me until I was an adult. So again, I just want to emphasize discernment is really important there. But to be vulnerable, to say, I remember when I was your age, I went to school and my teacher said something to me that affected me for years. And isn't it interesting how sometimes when somebody says something, they don't really think of how their words can affect a person for a very long time? Have there ever been times where somebody said something to you like that? And how did that affect you? And what do you think is really true about you? How would Jesus view you, as opposed to the way somebody who is nasty to you views you? That's vulnerability. The second thing to talk about is vision. I like to talk about with my children and the students I work with at Summit Ministries where they are now, but I also like to help cast a vision for their future. And on the handout that Gary has for you, there are going to be a lot more things. There's a long list. I think I've got 50 or 60 different questions on there that you can ask in all different kinds of situations. And I've tried to label them for you. But the core vision conversation is, let me share with you what I see in you. And then be as specific as you can be. Focus on character and effort, not just immutable characteristics. So I wouldn't say to a young child, you're beautiful. You're just so beautiful, or you're so smart. It's better to say, I really appreciate the way you care about others. And there is such a beauty in that. That is so attractive, the way you care for other people. Or to say, you really worked hard to get that grade. And I'm proud of you for the hard work that you put into it, because you sat down and you studied, you read the material, you asked your teacher questions, and you made the effort. And that grade is something that you earned and you can be proud of. I see you as the kind of person who will, because you are willing to be determined and work hard, you'll be able to be successful with what you do in your life. Cast vision. And then the third V, so vulnerability, vision, and the third one is values. And this is where conversations can turn to something that's more spiritual. So it might even be something like, a lot of people are confused right now and they don't know where to turn. And I just want you to know, as your grandma, as your grandpa, one of the things I have never regretted in my life is getting to know God through the Bible. And whenever you're in a place where you need some encouragement, I just want you to know that God is there, that He's for you, that He wants a relationship with you, and that you can turn to Him, not only to get comfort for the difficult times, but also to help give you direction for how to live a good life. There are a number of other things that I could share there, but bringing up questions about tough topics, that's one of the slides that you'll have access to. Questions to inspire vision, even just questions to get to know, because sometimes with our grandkids, we, how are you? Great. How's school? Fine. Hey, you want to go get some ice cream or something? But a lot of times we don't know as well as we would like what our grandchildren's likes or dislikes are, or what they really enjoy about their extracurricular activities, or what kinds of things they find interesting and why, and what sorts of activities they're involved in at the present time. and what kinds of things they would like to try. If they knew that failure wouldn't count against them, what kinds of things would they try? What would they like to be able to do? And then talking about spiritual things. Well, I feel like I'm a little bit conditioned by where I live. I'm here right now in Colorado, in Manitou Springs, which is a little hippie town right at the foot of Pikes Peak. It's a very new age town. Everybody talks about spiritual things. If you walked up to a random person on the street and asked, do you ever think about spiritual things? You would get a conversation. Now, I know that's not true in a lot of places, but it's still a valuable question. Hey, a lot of people think that only the material world exists. A lot of people, though, think that there is something more out there. Have you thought much about that? And what are some of the conclusions that you've drawn? Those sorts of questions can come up naturally in a context where you've invested in the relationship. There are a couple of other book recommendations. Here are a couple of places that I turn when my kids were asking difficult questions about God and about Jesus. One of my friends, one of our instructors here at Summit Ministries, is named Natasha Crane, Crain. And she's written several books, but two of them in particular stuck out to me. One is Talking with Your Kids About God, and the other one is Talking with Your Kids About Jesus. So those are two resources I have right here on my shelf. And when I'm in a situation where a child asks me a question, I don't feel like I have to know the answer right there, but I would say something like, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think a lot of people wonder, for example, why would people go to hell? Why would God do that? Or if there really is a God, then why is there pain in the world? Because if God is really the way you say, Grandma, and he's really good, and he's also all powerful, which is what you're telling me, then why wouldn't he stop evil from happening? Those sorts of questions. So you don't just have to look at books like Natasha Crane's books. You can look at her blog. I think it's natashacrane.com. And there are other resources out there where you can find answers. And then you just say, it's a fantastic question. And I want to give you an answer off the top of my head, but I don't want to lead you astray. Can I take you out for coffee or ice cream or whatever next time we get together? And I will look up a couple of things and I'll get back to you about that. Then you've just invited another conversation, which is we're seeing is part of the truth relationship DNA double helix. So as I get ready to close here, I'd like to invite you to participate in the Summit Ministries program. These 2-week programs I've been describing are for young adults 16 to 22 years of age. And in these programs, students come for 2 weeks, either to our campus here in Manitou Springs, Colorado, which is right next to the mountains, or in the mountains of Georgia, Lookout Mountain, Georgia, on the campus of Covenant College. Those 2-week programs for 16 to 22-year-olds happen all summer long, so there are lots to choose from to fit a variety of schedules. And you can find more information about those. We developed a special landing page for you, summit.org/legacy, summit.org/legacy. And if you're interested in your grandchildren coming to that program, I would encourage it. This is something that grandparents do all of the time to have an influence in the lives of their grandkids. They arrange for them to come to Summit Ministries. I was just sharing about this with a grandparent the other day. And this grandparent said to me, my wife and I have saved up money for our grandchildren's education. And he named the figure. It was a lot of money. And they said, the criteria for them to have access to that money for their college education is that they go to Summit for 2 weeks. Another grandparent told me just yesterday, my grandchildren all know that if they're to be included in the inheritance, they have to go to Summit Ministries before they go to college. Now, you say, well, that sounds like bribery. But see, these grandparents understand what's going to happen to their grandchildren at college. They recognize that they may not have a lot of influence over the lives of their grandchildren in many ways, but they do have that kind of influence. And so Those students will be here this summer, and I know, based on my experience, they'll have a fantastic time. I also know that their lives will change. We've had 2 independent studies done of Summit Ministries. And one of them, I shared with you that 4% of young adults in the United States of America have a biblical worldview who are church attending, self-identified Christians. After they finish 2 weeks at Summit, they move from 4% having a biblical worldview to 86% having a biblical worldview. We did another study where we asked, how able did you feel to defend your faith before you came to Summit? 40% of the young people said they felt able to defend their faith. By the time they left, 90%. And this study was done of people who had gone to Summit Ministries several years ago. So that effect seemed to really last. We asked them, how committed were you to Christianity when you came to Summit? 44% said they were committed to Christianity. When by the time they left, 77%. So it has a powerful impact to be together with these Christian thought leaders, have a chance to get all of their big questions asked, and to begin discovering answers, to learn how to enjoy the search for knowledge, the search for truth, but to recognize that ultimately truth exists, and it's not just a mathematical concept or a logical proposition. The truth is a person. It's Jesus. So thank you for allowing me to share. And I know in a few minutes, I think we'll have some time for questions, and I'll look forward to talking with you further.
So thank you. Just hang around if you would a little bit, and we'll come back in a few minutes for some Q&A. So you can, let's go ahead and bring you back up, Jeff, and we'll ask some questions to you.
Or before we dive into the questions,
yes.
I realized I told you there were 3 things to ask about, 3 F's, and I mentioned friends, feelings, and future, but I didn't talk about future.
Future,
Would you like
right.
me to mention that?
Yeah, go ahead. We did have some questions on that.
Okay, yeah. My notes are so tiny here on my little piece of paper that
That's okay.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay. So when I ask about the future, my questions they're the kinds of questions I ask myself. For example, if I have a child who's experiencing a difficulty, I'll ask, I want you to imagine your future self. How would you like to look back on this situation and say that you've handled it? Okay, in other words, you're kind of asking about a goal, or what's your perspective, or what's most important in this situation. But using that future self question can sometimes be helpful. Another thing I like to ask about is just the view of the future. With the students I'm working with at Summit Ministries, what are some of the things that concern you about the future? What are some of the things you're excited about for the future? So it goes along with the idea of vision. Look out ahead a little bit. We're always going to have difficulties. Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So Jesus doesn't tell us to ignore our problems and our pains, but he does want us to put them in the context of God's in chargeness. So that was the point I wanted to communicate.
Okay. Yes. So how many students did you say you had come to Summit Ministries last year?
In all of our courses, in all of our curriculum programs, this is not including the short-term weekend events we did and things like that, but it was 66,000 students.
That's encouraging. I mean, there's many more out there, but
yeah. And the 2-week programs, now those are small. Okay. And when I say a huge number like 66,000, some people are thinking that's an arena. No, these 2-week events are small. There will be maybe 180 students. We have 1 staff member for every 5 students. So it's very personal. They have question and answer times, as well as lectures, small groups, one-on-one time with mentors while they're here. So it's a very personal experience, as well as something that will challenge them intellectually and spiritually.
Yes, and I had the pleasure to visit your facility there in Colorado Springs, Manitou Springs, this 3 years ago. It's such a comfortable, cozy place. I could just see that there will be all kinds of little areas for
Yeah.
students to sit and talk and have small group discussions.
Yeah.
Really a great spot. Okay, well, here's some questions. So Garth is asking, what are your thoughts on telling your grandchildren that you're proud of them or that they should be proud of themselves when the Lord wants us to be humble and not proud?
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. And I think I try to, with my own children, distinguish between being a proud person and my encouraging them for an effort that they have undertaken that had good results. So I will say to my kids, I'm proud of you. But I always have to follow that with, and I'm proud of you for this specific reason. And then I will tell them what it is. My kids actually, in fact, I had one of my sons, he was going through a tough season. And I said, I just want you to know I'm proud of you. And he said, why? Wow. Well, that opened up a huge conversation.
Mhm.
But I want them to know that they can make efforts that will result in good for other people. Recently, my son, a mother in his school, called me and then texted me and said, I just want you to know your son, she said, my son is in the school and he's had a really rough year. She didn't say that he's been bullied, but he's kind of been excluded. And she said, your son took him out for a Coke after school, and just the two of them, just to invest in him. Well, that makes my father's heart so proud, but I wanted to share that with my son, not in a way to say, you're so cool for paying attention to the kids who are excluded, but to say, son, what I see in your heart is that you are paying attention to all of the people who are around you and wanting to make sure that they feel included. And I just want you to know, I appreciate that, because I felt very often when I was growing up excluded, not picked for the team or whatever. And the people who cared for me anyway were the people who helped me turn out to be a good person. And I just want to say, that's great. Keep doing that. Just make that a lifelong habit.
That's a good differentiation for sure. So Christina said, what are some of the things the young people do at the summit during the 2 weeks?
Well, they have a lot of class. We have classes on pro-life. We have classes on all those different worldviews that I mentioned earlier. We have classes, how do you know there is a God? How do we know the world is designed rather than simply a product of random evolution? We have classes on how do we know the Bible's true? Things like that. We have classes on the major social issues of our day, issues like gender identity, same-sex attraction. There's really no topic that students are thinking about that we don't try to address from a biblical worldview. Yeah. And then in the free time, students do all kinds of things. We're 2 blocks from Pike National Forest. You can't see it because you're looking at me, but I'm looking out the window. There's Pikes Peak. And Pike National Forest is 2 blocks away. Students can go on hikes. We do whitewater rafting, rock climbing. We play sports. Students can go into town and get ice cream and kind of walk around and watch the hippies. But it's they just have fun. They just have fun together. It's not a camp that's out in the middle of nowhere. We're part of our town.
Yeah, it's a great place. Well, just speaking of what you talked about, Dennis asked how to respond to a granddaughter with gender dysphoria. I would imagine that's a topic for sure.
It's a big topic. It's bigger than we sometimes realize. According to a study I saw back in December, 30% of young people identify with LGBTQ. That doesn't mean they identify as LGBTQ necessarily. But what they identify with is the fact that people might be so confused about who they are that they don't even really know what their identity is. So they might try to find labels to identify themselves. And that's why you have these lists. For example, 57 different genders. They're all terms that are made up, labels that people stick onto their own heads because they don't have any core identity that they know of. Gender dysphoria is real. It's not 30% of young people who deal with it, but you almost certainly will have grandchildren who struggle with this or who have friends who struggle with this. And there are several things that I want young people to know. The first thing is your identity is not just in whether you're a boy or a girl. That the way God teaches us, our core identity is as image bearers of Him. That we have our core identity in Christ. And that when we have our core identity in Him, and you could just testify to your grandchildren about this, say, everybody wrestles with their identity, don't they? And some people think that their core identity problem is one of gender. Some people think their core identity problem is one of success. I'm a good student, or I'm a good athlete. Or they put their whole identity in it. Well, what happens if they fail a course? I was a college professor for a while. Some students go neurotic when they get a bad grade because they've put their identity in being a good student. Others put their identity in being a good athlete. What happens if you break your arm? You can't play your sport anymore. Then where's your identity? So we need to have our identity in something that is bigger than us, bigger than our bodies, even bigger than our own individual souls. Yeah. So that's kind of the core conversation there. I was visiting with my friend, Dr. Trent Langhofer, who helps our Summit staff here learn how to help students in mental health issues. And he runs the counseling center for Colorado Christian University here in Colorado Springs. And he said, I asked him, what about gender dysphoria? And he said, Jeff, of the thousands and thousands of people I've counseled, lots of them have gender identity issues. And he said, it's never about gender. As I begin to counsel them and they go deeper and begin to resolve some of these unresolved hurts in their lives, the gender dysphoria issue resolves itself for most of them. Not all, but most.
Yeah.
I said, well, what do you mean by most? He said 75% of young people who say, I think I'm a girl in a boy's body, for example, by the time they reach 20 years of age, it's resolved. Now, what would stop it from being resolved is if you were to chemically treat a child, or to have surgery, or to somehow try to adjust the actual reality to their reality. That just makes it even more difficult and confusing. And I know these are tough issues in our time.
Tough issues, yeah. But I'm so happy they'll get addressed and talked about. Well, we've run out of time, Jeff. I wish we had more time. I'm sure we would have more questions for sure. Just